Welcome everyone. I am Julien from the Legal Working Group, and I'm glad to see that this webinar raised some interest. We are here today to talk about CC Signals, an initiative launched by Creative Commons 1 year ago, I think. And the Legal Working Group identify CC Signals as a project to watch for, and with Andrea and Rebecca and myself, we set up this internal webinar to start the discussion. And so we invite Brigitte Vézina, who is Director of Policy and Open Culture for Creative Commons. She will be presenting CC Signals, and then we could have a Q&A. You can either type your question in the chat during the speech, and we'll take them after, or you can ask them directly after the speech. So, Brigitte, I thank you for joining us at LIBER, and I give the floor to you, so you can start your presentation.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Jan. Thanks, everyone, for the opportunity to meet your group and speak to you about CC's work on AI in the Commons. As I was saying before we officially started, I will be giving a short presentation, but I'm mostly looking forward to the Q&A. I also want to warn you that I probably won't have all the answers to your questions, but I think all of the questions will be super informative to help guide us as we continue to iterate on this signals idea. So, like I said, feel free to ask questions and let's have a dialogue rather than me talking at you. But first, I'll just give you an overview of Creative Commons. I was told that you are pretty familiar with the organization and the licenses, so I won't go into too much detail. But just to remind you of our current mission as it is expressed in our current strategy, our goal is to empower individuals and communities around the world through technical, legal, and policy solutions that enable the sharing of education, culture, and science in the public interest. And that is what guides and informs the work that we're doing in addressing the impact of AI on the commons. And I'll start with some of the more positive aspects of artificial intelligence and how it has interacted with the commons so far, and state that it actually has a lot of potential to sustain the commons in the public interest. We know that AI technologies have the potential to serve the public good, that they can help sustain a healthy commons, that AI systems can engage with the commons in ways that are transparent, accountable, responsible, and ethical, and that AI can, and we've seen this already in practice, support legitimate research activities in order to benefit the public. And within this context, I think cultural heritage institutions are a good example. They can use AI technologies to preserve their collections, to analyze them, to enrich the content of their metadata. There are lots of very positive use cases of AI for heritage management. And likewise, not-for-profit researchers can really rely on AI to identify patterns that can lead to all sorts of scientific breakthroughs and new discoveries. So that is the starting point for us to address AI in a welcoming and positive way. However, it looks like in some respects, AI did break the commons as we knew it before. And that's in two main aspects. So the first one is economic, and the second one is more values, like normative based. In terms of the economic impact, we've heard and observed evidence that scraping and harvesting of commons data has led to increased costs and therefore an undue economic strain on the open infrastructure, which then in turn impedes financial sustainability. So for example, many websites will become visited by AI bots, and this increased scraping and harvesting will lead to a strain on servers, which will then lead to an increase in costs in order to maintain those servers and make them available um, for human consumption. And at the same time, there is a considerable extraction of value from the commons, but without any contribution back to the commons. So we're observing that, first of all, AI scraping and harvesting increases the costs. It extracts a lot of value, and there's no sharing back to sustain the commons whose costs are increasing, which were already in the beginning underfunded. So we're seeing an exacerbated economic strain on the open infrastructure. The other aspect of how AI is impacting the commons in a more negative way is that the commercial AI practice often are at odds with the values and norms of the commons. And this materializes in two aspects. First, it's the lack of attribution and transparency, where we've seen that most generative systems do not meaningfully acknowledge the sources they rely on. And this is a core tenet of the commons. It's also illustrated by the fact that all CC licenses include the by element, which requires attribution. So it is a fundamental component of how people have been sharing in the commons, this attribution, and with AI, that connection to the source is often lost. There is also a lack of openness when open and free knowledge that circulates freely in the commons becomes then locked in proprietary models when it is captured by AI and then generated when AI generates outputs that are available only in proprietary models. So the commons is facing a sort of conundrum in the face of AI because that leaves researchers and data stewards in general with two options. They are either going to allow unrestricted extraction by AI developers and say, this is our mission. This is what we are designed and this is our raison d'etre. Therefore, we're just going to allow all of this bot scraping. Or the other option, and this is what we've also observed, is that there's a tendency to restrict access in very blunt and overbroad ways. So this is referred to as defensive enclosure. So in response to this extraction, a lot of data stewards will just decide to close up or block access in a very unnuanced way. And we've seen some examples of these blunt defensive measures apply through legal or technical or financial means. So, for example, some open access publishers are recommending their authors to move from a very open license, CC BY, to the most restrictive license there is, which is CC BY and C and D, doesn't allow any commercial reuse, doesn't allow any adaptations as a mechanism of control. So we've seen this with the ACM, for example, this one publisher that is recommending moving to more restrictive licenses. And we'll go into more detail, but A, not only is this not effective to control AI uses, but B, it mostly negatively impacts human collaboration and other researchers who are then unable to interact with this content as freely as an open license would allow. There are also technical blocks like CAPTCHAs or bot blocking or rate limiting. A lot of news publishers are using this. We know that in cultural heritage institutions are using this. Maybe you've had to click through Cloudflare boxes recently. And there, again, this might impact archiving efforts. So efforts by the Internet Archive, for example, or Common Crawl, which serve a very important public interest mission of archiving the web for posterity. And their work is being hampered by these overbroad technical blocks. This can also be achieved through financial means like paywalled APIs. And we've seen that X, formerly Twitter, did that post-acquisition. And there again, we have evidence of this negatively impacting researchers. So as a consequence, the commons is more fragmented and potentially also shrinking as more and more people are backsliding, refraining from sharing openly and not sharing openly at all. So that content that would have otherwise been made available openly had AI not been around is now being further restricted with consequences on researchers and the institutions that serve them, including research libraries. So this has a consequence of impoverishing the commons and is posing an existential risk for Creative Commons because it risks basically undoing the progress that we've made as an open movement over the last 20 years. We had just come to a stage where finally there was broad acceptance and use of CC licenses in scholarly publication through open access journals. And now we are seeing that this trend is reversing. And like I mentioned, the collateral damage affects public interest activities like research, preservation, accessibility for people with disabilities. So it's like this overblown, overbroad reaction to the butt scraping that is the main threat to the commons, and what we're seeing is making people want to share less and less. So what we're seeing is that this virtuous cycle of pursuit of knowledge and instinct to share among researchers, but also creators in general, those that participate in the commons, is being broken mostly because of these dominant profit-driven approaches to AI that are at odds with the open ethos. And like I said, many are trying to resort to more restrictive CC licensing in order to curb this trend, but these licenses are very quickly hitting a copyright wall because we know that AI is really disrupting the way that people produce, access, and share knowledge, but the copyright landscape, as always, struggles to keep up with technological innovation and evolution. And so we are now navigating a very uncertain legal landscape when it comes to copyright. And as a consequence, CC licenses, because they are copyright licenses, are also in a gray area, and it's not clear, at least not everywhere in the world, whether a CC license will have any impact on whether anyone can use content for AI training or text and data mining. So there's a lot of legal uncertainty. And that is mostly due to the fact that when there's a copyright exception in place for AI training, the CC license conditions will not be triggered. Therefore, the use for AI training or TDM will be legal under an exception. And because the exception trumps the CC license, the terms and conditions of the license cannot be enforced. And that is a basic principle of how licenses have been developed and enforced over time. It was very important for CC at the time that if the law, the copyright law under an exception, permits a use and makes it lawful, the CC license should not impose further restrictions. In other words, the copyright exception overrides the CC license. So that means that whether the baseline is that there's a copyright exception in place or not, the CC license conditions will apply or not. And that creates a lot of legal uncertainty, especially for researchers collaborating across borders. The other aspect is that CC licenses, at least in the past few years, have been perceived, rightly or wrongly, as an implicit permission to use the content in AI systems. So people seeing the CC license would naturally kind of instinctively believe that a CC license implies consent for any kind of use, therefore AI use. But what we're seeing through consultations with our communities is that some people have shared under a CC license, but had not anticipated that it would be used for AI training or other kinds of uses. And there is a kind of conflict between the freedoms associated with the CC license and their views and their wishes when it comes to AI training. And this perception that CC licenses are an invitation to train is also causing this further uncertainty and the reactions that we've seen that I've mentioned. And what we know is that the CC licenses, they're not just for individual creators, they are essential for the infrastructure of entire sectors. So scholarly communication, as you know, open education, open science, open heritage, they are used not only by individuals, but by huge institutions, and they underpin enormous knowledge infrastructure. So they're really pivotal in allowing people to share content. And what we're seeing is that because across these different sectors, there are also various views and opinions. We're seeing that members of our community are either embracing AI with a lot of enthusiasm and optimism, while others are distrusting it and withdrawing from the commons as a result. And of course, many fit somewhere in between those two polar extremes. And so what we're seeing is that the CC licenses don't actually capture the full range of intentions that people have in sharing in our AI mediated commons. So many people did not anticipate AI being used to access their content, or that AI would be developed on the basis of their content. And so there's a bit of a mismatch between their intention and what the license actually say in the letter of the license terms. And going back to CC's principles and on a theoretical level, it's obvious that the purpose and the values of the commons are encouraging CC license content to be used to build new technologies, including AI. But what happens in practice is that the governance system, so this kind of implicit social contract that underpins the commons that enable open sharing, haven't kept pace with the speed, the scale, and the impact of AI development. So the licenses are a legal and technical tool, but they also serve as norms and are complemented by norms that are either written or unwritten, but at least that there's a whole body of good behavior practices that have evolved over the 20 years that the commons have been built around CC licensed content. And it's those norms that are most impacted by how AI is interacting with the commons. And so what we've come to realize is that the CC licenses are not sufficient to address how content is used because copyright law is uncertain. And also that copyright is actually not the main event. It's not the only, and it's probably not even the main legal system that we need to address, that we need to interact with in order to remedy some of the impacts on the commons. And that's where we started with the idea of the CC signals. So going back a year ago, we, I don't want to say launched, but we presented the idea for CC signals. And originally, when we first shared news with the world, we presented signals as data governance tools, so not copyright tools that could be used in parallel in combination with the CC licenses that would help the licensors indicate, so really just signal their preferences, so their wishes, their desires with regard to AI uses. So this was a relatively narrow and a tool-focused approach. So you would have your CC license governing the copyright aspects, and then you would have a preference signal resting inside the data governance legal system that would indicate in a very polite and non-binding way the wishes of the licensor with respect to AI training specifically. And the community feedback was harsh, that this approach was not enough. So remember those two camps that I mentioned so a few minutes ago, both of them were unhappy. The ones that wanted the content to be used in an unfettered way, as originally intended by like pure open principles, were dissatisfied that CC would come up with a tool that would actually restrict the freedoms associated with the CC licenses. And on the other end, those that want to have more control and more agency over the use of their content for AI were disappointed that didn't have any legal teeth and could easily be ignored. There was no enforcement mechanism associated with the signals, and therefore it was not efficient to meaningfully shift power between content creators and AI developers. So, dissatisfying as a whole. Signals alone obviously could not create that agency in a system where many people did not choose to participate in. So those are people who had been sharing openly before the advent of AI, who didn't anticipate that AI would be so disruptive, and they did not choose to participate in there. And they felt lost and kind of abandoned, that they could not use the CC licenses to have a say over whether their content could be used for AI training or not. So moving forward, a year later, our goal is the same. So it's really to sustain access to human knowledge in the age of AI, but our approach has evolved. And then our motto, if you will, is that if we want a future where knowledge is shared and AI serves the public good, we need to ensure that the commons can thrive. So our goal is to restore trust, making people trust sharing in the commons, to strengthen participation, so encourage people to participate and share in the commons. At the same time, embed these public interest values into the the AI knowledge ecosystem, because our objective is really to rebalance power in order to protect the commons. So we're doing this in a granular, nuanced, and not at all black or white way, because we know that open access through the CC licenses, they created this spectrum of sharing from CC BY to CC BY and C and D, and all the permutations in between. And we need something similar for AI. We also need a spectrum of participation so that people confidently share to the extent that they are comfortable with. And so this requires a balancing act between preserving access to valuable knowledge resources, so making sure that access is not unduly blocked, but also ensuring that the institutions and the communities that steward these knowledge resources are still active participants in shaping the AI ecosystem. So we're now looking at interventions that continue the spirit of the CC signals, but are now divided into three separate strands, so to speak. And that sustaining this healthy commons, like I said, will require stronger governance and accountability. And that can only be achieved through collective action and movement building. So what we're going to do is three things, and I'll go into more detail for each of them, is first to stabilize open sharing, then to make attribution the norm in AI, and then thirdly, we're looking into building tools that protect these public interest uses while restoring agency, and that all that in line with the values of the open movement. So the first goal is really to stabilize open sharing, and in order to do that, we're going to hopefully very soon issue some license guidance to help people, again, build more confidence and help them in making decisions now until we develop anything new about whether they want to share in the commons or not. So that includes informing them about the limits of the CC licenses and how actually going from a more open CC license to a more restrictive one is not likely to have any impact on whether it's used for AI training or not, and will, on the contrary, just diminish access for other researchers. So this guidance will be a way to at least clarify how the licenses work in the current environment, while still encouraging people to use them to share in the commons. Then we want to work on attribution best practices, because we know that attribution is a cornerstone of the commons. We know that it's fundamental and that people who share in the commons are often adamant about being attributed. And this is part of the deal with open sharing. And we believe that this will help ensure more participation, more transparency, because it will enable knowledge to be traced, to be evaluated, and built upon mostly without losing this connection to the people in the community. So we know that a lot of institutions would be willing to share their content for AI training, so long as they can still be referred to as the source, and that people using AI tools in order to generate content would be able to retrieve where the original information comes from. And so our work there consists in researching and analyzing best practices, which we will then share as a kind of blueprint of what attribution could look like in that context. And we'll do this with a focus on RAG, so retrieval augmented generation, because we believe that this is the easiest place to start. It's kind of the low-hanging fruit of how AI does retrieve information based on specific sources. So we'll be issuing those also in the near future. And the last strand is about developing these new tools, which I think are the closest thing to the CC signals as we intended, or as we develop them in this first stage. Because I think that we realize that many stewards, they want to continue to share their collections, and they want to ensure also that AI developers use those collections responsibly by providing attribution, transparency, and also having some public interest safeguards. And so what we want to do is we want to help build this tooling. So whether it's Creative Commons developing these tools, or whether we partner with other organizations to develop these practical technical tools that will enable the participation in the AI ecosystem. And we want to create this middle path that will offer an alternative to the current binary of it's a free-for-all and anyone can use anything in the commons without having to ask for permission and without any obligations or requirements for transparency, versus defensive enclosure, which is the worrying trend that we're seeing. And so we want to enable this through the development of standardized, pro-social, and legally enforceable conditions. So that is the main difference with what we had before. And true to CC's original roots, we want to make sure that these are standardized, because this was one of the strengths of the CC licenses, is that they are all the same, irrespective of jurisdiction or sector. And so we will be looking at developing two tools. One is an AI preference, and the other one is a multi-layer license. The name is still TBD, because as you can see, MLL is an unfortunate abbreviation, especially if you're trying to say it in the same sentence as an LLM. I struggle. But yeah, so the first one would be an AI preference that would attach to something like robot.txt that would strike a balance between creator agency and public interest reuse. And we're working with the IETF on this, so the Internet Engineering Task Force, in developing vocabulary for an AI preference that would enable those using it to say no to AI training, but with important caveats and exclusions to protect public interest reuse. So if you think of Article 3 of the DSM type exceptions, those types of uses, so non-commercial research, for example, would be excluded from the ability to say no under this AI preference. And then there would be another tool, which we would be developing, especially for openly shared collections and compilations, which would be a fusion of copyright and contract law. So that's why it's called multi-layer. There's a copyright layer and there's a contract layer. And that would allow conditional access to this data. So data stewards could set terms for accessing and using a collection that would protect the technical infrastructure sustainability. So the idea is that let's say you're knocking at the door and there's first this contract layer that sets terms for accessing the data. And then once you access the data, because the collection and compilation could be protected by copyright as a database or a collection, the copyright restrictions would then apply. And we're seeing potential adopters of this multi-layer license as those data stewards that take care of large data sets mostly. So research institutions, data repositories, public knowledge projects, cultural heritage institutions like libraries and archives who could use this mechanism in order to set some of the conditions over the use of their content for commercial AI training. And so resource-heavy bulk reusers of data would be subject to more conditions than those requesting less data access. And in this case as well, public interest uses would be excluded entirely. So anything that would be allowed under a copyright exception for legitimate interest of the public would not be subject to any conditions for access and reuse under this MLL. So we're hoping that this will repair this this sharing cycle where the pursuit of knowledge instigates an increased instinct to share through mutual commitment and then collective benefit. We know that in order to have this mutual commitment, we need to combine the freedoms associated with openness to some boundary setting. And for us, it's really important that open should not be a purity test. So it's not open for open's sake, but that in some cases, conditional access will be better than no access at all. That conditional sharing will be better than no sharing at all. Therefore, establishing boundaries will reinforce and strengthen the commons, as paradoxical as it may sound. So if you want to have a say, we will be reaching out to our community for feedback about this new approach. And the best way to do that is to sign up for our newsletter, and then you'll get information about how to engage. So the URL is there on the screen. I can also share it in the chat. And then we look forward to your participation. And thank you very much. I look forward to the conversation.